Peace. Peace to the family. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism. And this is episode 24. So we are, progressing. I can't wait till we get to episode 100. We're going to celebrate then. But definitely I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in. Make sure that you share this podcast and book club. We want to get as many people tuning in as possible so we can get this information out to our people. So I am Ikemba, member of the Public Relations Committee.
Peace, everyone. This is Tierney. I am the steering committee chair for We Charge Colonialism.
All right. So We Charge Colonialism. We're 2/3 of our crew. Want to give a shout out to Frank. Speedy recovery, and hope that he is back with us soon. So again, we are We Charge Colonialism, or organization fighting to dismantle colonialism. We're working to build an international movement against colonialism. We understand that the struggle for Africans in the United States of America is inextricably tied to our struggle on the continent of Africa, in Europe, and South America. So a lot of the topics that we do discuss are going to be pertaining to what's happening on the continent, as well as Europe and other places. So we always start off our podcast and book club with a weekly roundup. And actually, before we get into that, I just want to let everyone know where we are in the reading. We're continuing to read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. So if you have the book, we're going to start on page 6. Oh, there we go. There's a third, so he can take over for Frank till Frank comes back.
I know, right? He should. He's been in like the camera just as much as all of us.
Right. He's gonna replace you. Like, Ma, you can sit down. I got this.
I think that I've been thinking that for a long time since he was a little baby. I mean, I used to have him in my videos more, and yes, he's ready to take the spot.
Right on. He's not camera shy. I tell you that much. So page 6 of in the book, if you're reading from the PDF, we're going to be on page 11 in the PDF, so that you can know where we're going to be starting at. We're going to go into our weekly roundup as usual, and African Esquire, it's on you.
So I mentioned on my channel earlier this week that we were going to discuss the issue of Barbados removing Queen Elizabeth from being their official head of state. So, excuse the background noise. Oh, actually, go to you for a second. One moment. I'm sorry. You're muted. It's all good though. But you're muted. Okay, let me see. So Barbados is removing Queen Elizabeth from being the head of state. So I'm reading from an article on CNN. I'll actually put it in the description. Let's see, where's the comments? But so if anyone doesn't know, like there's a number of Commonwealth countries, Barbados being a former one, there's other ones in Africa, there's other ones in the Caribbean. These are countries that were formerly colonized under the British Empire. And even after that colonization, they've allowed the British monarchy, to serve as their official head of state. So Barbados has announced, and they announced a while back also that they were planning to remove Queen Elizabeth. They set a date as far as when they're going to do that. So the article says it aims to complete the process in time for its 55th anniversary of independence on November of this year, 2021. And it also brings to light a number of other things that this comes with. So obviously, by now, a lot of the legal system has been determined by the Crown, meaning like they've adopted British common law as their own law. So that doesn't necessarily mean a complete change as far as what has been done from the colonial system, but it does mean a change as far as who's the recognized head of state inside of Barbados. So Ikemba, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So yeah, I was looking at this, right? When I knew we was going to talk about this story, it made me curious about just how the government is set up in Barbados. And so I was just reading this little wiki, I wanted to see the government of Barbados. It says the government of Barbados is ceremonially headed by the monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, as head of state. She is represented in the country by the Governor General, currently Dame Sandra Mason. The country has a bicameral legislature and a political party system based on universal adult suffrage and fair elections. The Senate has 21 members appointed by the Governor General on behalf of the monarch. So they're appointed, like they're not even the senators are elected. 12 of them on the advice of the prime minister, 2 on the advice of the leader of the opposition, and 7 at the governor general's sole discretion. And remember, the governor general is a representative representing the monarchy or the monarch. The House Assembly has 30 members, and they're all elected. So they directly elect the people in the House, but the Senate, those people are selected. So interesting setup for the government, but that my initial thoughts is just like, how is this not a colony where the politics is being influenced by the formal colony, right? So when we think about colonialism, colonialism is, especially like in the age of neo-colonialism, you have indirect influence, whether it's directly or indirectly done, but this influence and control over the politics, over the economy of another country, another nation. And so that's what we have here. We can see just by the setup where the representative of the monarchy is selecting the people who are in positions of power. And so I can imagine just like that connection with political decisions that's being made that's going to influence what type of economy, because politics influences and the banking system, of course, like influences how much things cost and so forth. Taxes, all of this has an impact on the people of that country. But I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
No, so I wasn't able to pull it up because my son was on me, but I was able to pull up the actual quote that I wanted to talk about too, because I think like we all can see that there's a difference between, removing someone from being your colonist, like in a real sense, that's revolutionary, but that, in my opinion, comes with bloodshed. In this case, it could just be a more like formality. I want to emphasize there are other countries who have done this in the past. So, for example, Dominica, Guyana, Trinidad, and Tobago, all separated from the British Crown. Trinidad and Tobago, I'm actually going to point out because a project I'm working on, some of you might have saw the organization, the Decolonization and Human Rights Clinic. One thing that we're working on is a documentary of the legal system. And like I was saying, having Queen Elizabeth no longer being the head of state doesn't necessarily mean that the country is going to be fully independent, because a lot of the legal system is still in place. So in the case of Trinidad, like they still have adherence to the Privy Council. The Privy Council is essentially the British Queen. So my question would be, just how significant is this? How far are they going to go? My bet would be, since it's not being driven by a revolutionary organization or the revolutionary movement of the people, but more being driven by actors in government, that it could sever some ties, but it will absolutely not sever all ties. That there will still probably be the same financial business interests there that were before. As we see, like when colonialism morphs into neo-colonialism, it doesn't mean that the conditions of ownership, the occupations of lands by foreigners, it doesn't mean that that's going to change. So one, it's good, number one, to see that at least there's a recognition that having this white woman being the head of a country that's supposed to be sovereign is a contradiction. That's a good recognition, and we shouldn't like overlook that, I think, because that's progress for some of us. But we also can't be satisfied with just that. And that's the risk, I think. It's good that, the consciousness of African people are being awakened to the fact that we are being put inside of a situation where these Europeans are making decisions about us that they shouldn't be. But it's also important for us to not be satisfied with just a surface level removal of white supremacy. But you have to go into like a real revolutionary change of government is going to go into not just who's the official head of state, but what policies are going to be changing, what's the land infrastructure, how's the economy going to be changing, is the economy still going to be tied to business interests inside of Britain? And so taking things further, which is like what we have to do as African people, we can't just stop with the symbolic changes. We have to push for the complete and revolutionary changes. Taking things further means that we have to actually analyze what is going to change as far as the sovereignty of people in Barbados. So that's something that I hope will continue to be a part of the conversation instead of just the removal of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, all we can do is hope, right? But I think like the reality is if there's no revolutionary forces on the ground that's working to bring this type of change, revolutionary change into fruition, we're probably just going to get more of the same. Just this this transition of power, or this another way I want to describe it, but the structure is still going to remain in place. And so as you were speaking, it was just making me think about the Revolutionary War, right? Where the British Empire was overthrown, but that didn't change the relationship between the elite class and the oppressed, the slaves or the colonized people in America. So that's the thing. Like, when I see these struggles, whether it's on the continent or wherever it is, for the struggle for power, I always look at it as just a struggle between the bourgeois class, who's going to control where the money is going, who's getting what, you know what I'm saying? And but these type of changes have to come from the grassroots. Like, they have to have a voice in these changes when it takes place. But yeah.
And also, like, I think it's important for us to keep in mind, again, not negating that this is a positive thing. Like, certainly, like, the awakening of the people, that this would be in the hearts and minds to happen, that's good as far as, saying that we're not going backwards. But it's also important to notice the nature of how it was done. This was like a negotiation. Queen Elizabeth had notice, like she knew it was coming. So I think we should just kind of like have standards as far as like what we consider revolutionary actions, because it's very different, when you're giving someone notice, hey, we're no longer going to have you as our official head of state, versus what happened in Haiti, when you have people like tearing the colonists away from being the speaker or the decider of the people's of the people's destiny. That's a very different situation, and you could tell because it has a different reaction. Because I'm very confident that there's never going to be a situation where African people attain sovereignty without bloodshed. I have not seen it. If anyone has seen it, tell us in the chat, like, of any people, attaining sovereignty without bloodshed. So that to me, like, this is more like a negotiation, and frankly, the British monarchy probably needs, to better their image at this particular point, because they've been getting a lot of criticism about their history of colonialism, and obviously, some future reports about racism. And so I look at this, as a legal negotiation, honestly.
Yeah, and I think, like, going back to your point too, of just looking at, we can look at the positive in this as far as like severing ties with the monarchy, and Barbados being, I think, somewhere around 80% African, so they represent a numerical majority with the Black population there. Now the next step is, how much control do they have? The people have over the economics. So we know revolution is a process. So this even this being a symbolic change or transformation in the relationship with the monarchy, that can mean something, at least to the consciousness of the masses of people. But we all know that it has to go a step further. But that's up to that's up for us putting out these putting out media that speaks to the contradictions. So but yeah, big up to the people of Barbados. So yeah, we're gonna move on to the next story. We're gonna go to Africa. We're gonna go to the continent, Kenya. I actually want to pull up the story, and this story is speaking to just neocolonialism at its best, and for us to like really be able to, at this point, it shouldn't be hard to identify neocolonialism, but let's get to it though. So looking at the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, who's the son of Jomo Kenyatta, who has some contradictions after Kenya won its independence. But I want to read this story. It says, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and his family are among the world leaders said to have hidden away billions of dollars in secret offshore accounts. Billions of dollars, right? As a matter of fact, Uhuru Kenyatta was worth $500 million when he ran for president. So we talk about Africa, sometimes in the poverty that exists over in Africa, but everyone's not poor, and a lot of people are getting rich at the expense of the people of the nation, or the people of the continent. So records obtained by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists show that Kenyatta family has a $500 million fortune tied up in at least 7 foundations and tax havens in various countries, including Panama and the British Virgin Islands. The family enlisted the services of one of the largest banks in Switzerland, Union Bancaire Privée, to register and establish a foundation in Panama to manage and shelter its wealth, which it began building under its patriarch, Jomo Kenyatta, who became Kenya's first president in 1964 after it gained independence from Britain. He's not even putting the money in black banks. These neo-colonialists.
Are there black banks really? Like, particularly, I don't know about the black startup banks in America, but are there really black banks in Africa?
Man,
this is tied to like the colonists, from what I've observed.
I mean, good point to raise. But yeah, I want to read. I just wanted to read that part of the story. I think we get the idea. I'll leave it with this. Forbes magazine ranked Uhuru Kenyatta as Kenya's richest person and the 26th wealthiest in Africa in 2011, 2 years before he was elected president as self-described anti-corruption crusader. Right? These politicians, boy, so duplicitous. But going back to Uhuru Kenyatta, he was born into wealth because Jomo Kenyatta, when he came to become the head of the state after Kenya gained its independence, I think in 61, 62, he used his position of power to enrich his family and himself, his family, and his constituents. Also the structure of the system that was set up is another thing we should look at, because Jomo Kenyatta was definitely pushing for the development of capitalism. He remained the relationships with the colonizers remained intact. So there was flag independence, but what we had was neo-colonialism when Jomo Kenyatta was in power. So there were people who were able to gain access to, I guess you could say, wealth, was able to climb the economic or social ladder. But today, despite those gains, today, I was doing some research, 42% of Kenya's population is living below the poverty line. That's 42%. We're talking about a population of 44 million people. So, we're talking about millions of people, somewhere around 20 million people who are living below the poverty line, while Kenyatta has all of this money on offshore accounts. But this is just speaking to neocolonialism, and this is why, we organize and we fight, because this type of activity needs to be called out. In order for, and the last point too I want to make is just the connection between the economics and the politics. Kenyatta and as far as political oppression, when Kenyatta was running for president against Odinga back in 2013, I think 2012, 2013, he with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, brought him up on charges for what was it? I don't know if it was the death, but it was political oppression. But I think there were some massacres that took place. But him and 5 others were charged for political oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, a lot more about the history of Kenya than I do. I know like surface level, and I know obviously about Kenyatta's trade-ins with the West. I know about his suppression of the Mau Mau, him playing a big part in their massacre post-independence. I know a big part of him selling out, becoming another neocolonial puppet, despite, having a beginning that looked a lot like he could have been poised, like, he was poised like Nkrumah in the beginning, like this is someone who was Pan-Africanist and forward thinking, which is, another question for us to ask is, what is happening between the beginning of, people who come out for the people, but then whenever they actually get power and they become a stooge of colonialism, what's happening in between. And I think a lot of it is probably like what that person actually was in the beginning was not what they presented themselves to be, as well as obviously the colonists are always willing to find your weak spot, and if you're willing to sell the people out for money, they have lots of money to offer. So I know like those surface level things, but you said a number of things I was not aware of as far as the son, Uhuru Kenyatta, right? Kenya is like, to me, an embarrassment of the Pan-Africanist legacy at this particular point. I put them like inside of that realm as being that controlled. The reason I say that is because it's not just about selling the people out, which is horrible. The fact that there's a famine going on right this very second in Kenya, and you have a president that's living lavishly off the people, and talking about anti-corruption. And I want to also flag, like, anytime y'all hear someone say anti-corruption, and that's all that they have to offer, I personally look at that as this person is not really for the people. And the reason I say that is because corruption is a symptom of something larger. And if you can't say neo-colonialism, but you can say corruption, that lets me know like where your thoughts and your feelings are. Your feelings are essentially blaming the outcomes instead of blaming the purpose or the one that created the problems. And that's something that Africans do habitually. And we think it's so good, because, hey, you're holding people accountable, but no, you're not holding the real one accountable. The number one person before any African politician that has to be held accountable, number one is the European. Like, if you're not going to hold the financial interest and all these people who are actively looting Africa accountable, but you want to say I'm anti-corruption, I'm going to hold these African politicians accountable, that lets you know where that person's allegiances lie. So, he's that person that's been pitching himself as that. But obviously right now, Kenya's going through a hard time with, as you said, a lot of people are in poverty. A lot of people are starving. But on top of all of these things that he has been compromised with is the fact that he's very closely aligned to American interests. America has used Kenya as a beacon for Afrikan operations. And that tells you right there that he is a collaborator, not just with Kenyans actually being oppressed, through the colonial system, but he's actually also partnering to allow to assist in the occupation of other countries in Africa. So this is like a top level traitor to me. There's obviously variations of people who are sold out to the West, but the worst and most reprehensible ones are the ones that are actively working alongside with the foreign powers to allow them to keep Africans inside of a certain position. So when the revelation came out, I didn't find it surprising. I'm sure you didn't find it surprising, because we should know that these neo-colonial puppets, they're well paid. Like, they are very well paid. It pays to be a sellout. It does. If that's what you're looking for, they have the money to offer it. So I wasn't surprised. I was actually more curious as to why there weren't more people listed, because by no means is Kenya the only country where their president is a multi-billionaire. You know, for example, Paul Biya, we know is literally like not even living in his country, and is known for hiding money in Switzerland and stuff like that, but he wasn't on the list. So I was more curious as to, of all African people who are selling out the masses, like just one, I don't know. But yeah, so I wasn't surprised. Kenyans, you know, we have to pray for them, because they are in a top-notch level of occupation as far as having obviously a sellout, but also their country being used as a base to oppress other outside African countries.
Yeah, you're right. Like in the article, it does say that he's one of many, but it doesn't really expose anyone else. It kind of just focuses on Uhuru Kenyatta. But yeah, it did raise that this isn't an anomaly right here. So that's important for us to know. Also, you know, there's some things I know we're short on time, but just quickly about Jomo Kenyatta and his background. Like he was in like a Scottish mission, I think, but he was definitely like influenced by Western civilization. I think like he ended up going to Europe at some point, and then when he came back to Kenya, he left Kenya again because of his what's the word I'm looking for? How he admired, I guess, like Western civilization. He wanted to go back to it, and so he went to a mission. He was educated there. He was educated, you know, by the West. So I think that, you know, that influence there may have played the factor. And also, he never admitted that he was a member of the Mau Mau. I know that was put on him, but even before and after independence, he never, you know, said that he was. And I don't know if that was just something he was saying because of political reasons, but, you know, he never made any acknowledgement that he was a member of the Mau Mau. And just D1 Beats, you know, he was talking about basically saying the same thing as far as Kenyatta just never having any interest in the masses of people. You wanted to add something?
No, I was gonna say, and Volvo correctly corrected us. You know, we should have said a Mau Mau. You know, because that's the term that the colonizers use. But
the
actual name, you know, no, the actual name is the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, but the Mau Mau is what the colonizer used. So thank you for you know, bringing that up.
Yes, appreciate that. The Kenya Land and Freedom Army, right? Right on. So yeah, continue to click on that share button. Share this podcast and book club. We want to get more and more people involved in these conversations. We have to expand our reach. So you know, I definitely appreciate everybody that's here right now, though, and participating in this discussion. We're going to make the transition to the book club, but before we do that, I just want to encourage everyone to go to our website, wechargecolonialism.org, read our newsletters. We got articles up there, videos, everything about what it is that we're doing. And also, you know, we put out a lot of information. So, you know, stay up to date with our organization and the things that we're doing around the country, and also whatever we have coming up. And also, I want to encourage people to become a member. Send an email to info@wechargecolonialism.org. You can become a member. You can become a member today. There's a process, but, you know, send an email, find out how you can get involved with our organization. We're looking for people with your skills to get involved in what we're doing. So before that, is there anything else we want to let the people know before we transition?
Nope, I think we're good. Let's
All right.
get into this reading.
Right on. So like I said, for those who just joining us too, if you're reading the book, we're reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and we are in the book one by Walter Rodney. Go ahead.
Sorry, and I forgot. I don't know if it was mentioned, but the book link will be posted in the description for anyone who doesn't have the physical copy.
Yes, and in the PDF, we're on page 11. Page 11 in the PDF, page 6 in the book. So yeah, we started off last week, and Walter Rodney he kind of laid out what development is, got into like the different characteristics of development and how all societies develop. And so he's basically sort of creating this picture of how early societies were and how they begin to develop into these complex societies. And we have like these social hierarchies that come out of these urban creations or urban cities. And so we're just going to pick up from there, and let's get into it. All right. So through the first paragraph, through careful study, it is possible to comprehend some of the very complicated links between the changes in the economic base and changes in the rest of the superstructure of the society, including the sphere of ideology and social beliefs. The changeover from communalism in Asia and Europe led, for instance, to codes of behavior peculiar to feudalism. The conduct of the European knights in armor had much in common with that of the Japanese samurai or warriors. They developed notions of so-called chivalry, conduct becoming a gentleman knight on horseback, while in contrast, the peasant had to learn extreme humility, deference, and obsequiousness, symbolized by doffing his cap and standing bareheaded before his superiors. In Africa, too, it was to be found that the rise of the state and superior classes led to the practice whereby common subjects prostrated themselves in the presence of the monarchs and aristocrats. When that point had been reached, it became clear that the rough equality of the family have given way to a new state of society. In the natural sciences, it is well known that in many instances, quantitative change becomes qualitative after a certain period. The common example is the way that the water can absorb the heat, a quantitative process, until at 100 degrees Celsius. It changes to steam, a qualitative change of form. Similarly, in human society, it has always been the case that the expansion of the economy leads eventually to a change in the form of social relations. Karl Marx, writing in the 19th century, was the first writer to appreciate this, and he distinguished within European history several stages of development. The first major stage following after simple bands of hunters was communalism, where property was collectively owned, work was done in common, and goods were shared equally. The second was slavery, caused by the extension of domineering elements within the family and by some groups being physically overwhelmed by others. Slaves did a variety of tasks, but the main job was to produce food. The next stage was feudalism, where agriculture remained the principal means of making a livelihood, but the land which was necessary for that purpose was in the hands of the few, and they took the lion's share of the wealth. The workers on the land, now called serfs, were no longer the personal property of the masters, but were tied to the land of a particular manor or estate. Before I had some thoughts on that too, because as I'm reading that paragraph, and he's talking about the transition from communalism to slavery to feudalism, it made me think about, of course, like the transatlantic slave trade, enslavement of Africans in the Americas, and sort of just like this skip over feudalism. I feel like took place in America, at least in some areas, because the Spanish colonies, you could argue, was sort of like more feudal than the English colonies. But in the English colonies, particular, you have this slave system that existed. And I think, like, as a matter of fact, and I'm thinking about it, the feudal system, I'm thinking about the encomiendas in the Spanish colonies, and they sort of made this transition, but they controlled the land, and the natives were supposed to, have the liberty to, of like working for some sort of like wage, or they would get something, in return for their labor. But I think like that was forced because of it was replaced, I should say, by the slave system, Africans being brought over, right? But I'm just thinking like, okay, we didn't go through this feudal, at least in Americas, we went straight to slavery, so we didn't go through this transition, right? But then I'm thinking, now we went through slavery, and then slavery is supposed to go to feudalism. Are we sort of like in that stage of feudalism where the elite is controlling the land, really? I mean, there's wage labor, but at the end of the day, like the resources and so forth are controlled by sort of like an aristocracy, just or an oligarchy. They got all these damn names. I don't even know what to call them, right? But there's an elite group that controls the land and the resources, and we have turned into like commodities to be brought and sold. So are we like free? I feel like we're human beings. You born into this world, free, but then you are turned into a commodity as a result of capitalism. But I don't know. It's just some thoughts that was coming.
Yeah, no, and it's important to analyze these variations. One, because it helps us understand. Well, one thing that I always, particularly when you look from when you go from communalism to slavery. This is Europe's progression: communalism to slavery to feudalism, and then to capitalism. One, I think it helps you appreciate the way that the system literally has to evolve, and it only evolves, under pressure. But the key agenda is to keep the system still intact, So if you even look at the similarities between slavery and feudalism, there's not like a whole lot of difference, in like how those systems operated. It's just like this perceived idea that technically I can, move off this land, but like, do you really have an economic choice? 1 second, let me close the door. I bet, yeah. So, but the idea is, do you really have, a choice when you look at the evolution of how it went from slavery to currently capitalism? Because I would argue capitalism, when you really think about it, this idea, free markets, you can go anywhere you want, you can be whoever you want. If you want to be Bill Gates, you can be Bill Gates. Most people are well aware by now that that's not the truth. You're literally forced to work for Bill Gates. Otherwise, if you don't work, you don't eat. So that's one thing that, I think we can appreciate, is how the system morphs, but also Ikemba, as you said, how like it regresses. Because the other thing I was thinking about as far as feudalism is very like intact. If you look at how things operate, particularly like in places in Africa, when you have these unfortunately, like there's a plethora of people whether it's tribes or governments that will lease out African land to European companies for like 100 years or a 99-year lease. And so technically they're owning the land, and the people who were indigenous to the land, who I would say are the rightful owners of the land. I don't believe that one person could sell off a communal land. So the rightful owners of the land, now that their land is leased by an outside company without their permission, they have no choice. Where am I going to go? I literally have to work the land. Otherwise, I won't be able to eat. And so it's a way that like it kind of fluctuates, and they always reintroduce the past in a modern sense, in a way that's adaptable to the circumstances. So yeah, I would definitely argue, when you look at what's happening with different land grabs inside of places where indigenous people are, that it really is reminiscent of feudalism, but it's repackaged and rebranded, of course, as this system has to do.
Yeah, right on. Like the chat is popping. Yeah, some good statements, the comments that are being made. I'm gonna go into the next one because we can build on this for ages. But so at the top of the next page, when the manor changed hands, the serfs had to remain there and provide goods for the landlord, just keeping enough to feed themselves. Just as the child of a slave was a slave, so the children of serfs were also serfs. Then came capitalism, under which the greatest wealth in the society was produced not in agriculture, but by machines. Oh, also another quick point too is when he talked about slavery, and most of that labor was used to produce agriculture, like to produce food. Under the slavery in the Americas, I feel like most of that was like cash crops, so that was a difference too, But I know he's sort of like focusing on like Europe and Asia, I think, at this point. But then came capitalism, under which the greatest wealth in the society was produced not in agriculture but by machines, in factories and in mines. Like the preceding phase of feudalism, capitalism was characterized by the concentration in a few hands of ownership of the means of producing wealth and by unequal distribution of the products of human labor. The few who dominated were the bourgeoisie, who had originated in the merchants and craftsmen of the feudal epoch and who rose to be industrialists and financiers. Meanwhile, the serfs were declared legally free to leave the land and go in search of employment in capitalist enterprises. Their labor then thereby became a commodity, something to be bought and sold. It was predicted that there would be a further stage, that of socialism, in which the principle of economic equality would be restored, as in communalism. In the present century, the phase of socialism has indeed emerged in some countries. Economically, each succeeding stage represented development in a strict sense, that there was increased capacity to control the material environment and thereby to create more goods and services for the community. The greater quantity of goods and services were based on greater skills and human inventiveness. Man was liberated in the sense of having more opportunities to display and develop his talents. Whether man uplifted himself in a moral sense is open to dispute. The advance in production increased the range of powers which sections of society had over other sections, and it multiplied the violence which was part of the competition for survival and growth among social groups. It is not at all clear that a soldier serving capitalism in the last World War was less primitive in the elemental sense of the word than a soldier serving in one of Japan's feudal armies in the 16th century, or for that matter, than a hunter living in the first phase of human organization in the forests of Brazil. Nevertheless, we do know that in those three respective epochs, hunting ban, feudalism, capitalism, the quality of life improved. It became less hazardous and less uncertain, and members of society potentially had greater choice over their destinies. All of that is involved when the word development is used. Yeah, just to build on that right there, one of the things that I'm thinking about in this analysis is like I get where Walter Rodney is coming from as far as the development aspect, but I feel like that can only like really be attributed to, and maybe I'm having a narrow way of looking at it, but just a sector of society though. Like I feel like with the development, there's always development. There's ebbs and flows, and he makes this point. There's certain periods where there may be some stagnation, there may be some, movement, some regression. But all societies are working to survive and to develop the technologies in order for them to advance and be able to survive in their environment. And environmental changes can cause like an evolution in these societies or people. But the point I wanted to make, though, is that when he's talking about these developments through these different stages, I feel like it's development at the expense of the masses of people. So even though there may be some technological advances that we can point to and say, hey, we're more advanced in this society in this way, but at what expense? And I think like that's the struggle we're having now, is to sort of eliminate this parasitic nature of the systems where we don't develop at the expense of another group of people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Oh my gosh, let me close the door again 1 second.
Y'all know how it is. Mother duties. Yeah, but I don't know. That was just something I was looking at.
Yeah, sorry. That's a really good point. And I think this is an important point, particularly when we're talking about the African continent, because a lot of people articulate that they want to see development inside of Africa, but they don't articulate a path as far as like, well, what way are you trying to go? But not saying development is bad, first of all, but if you think about the countries that we consider to be developed, as was established by Walter Rodney, the development that occurred had a real human expense, barbaric, human expense. When you look at feudalism, like that was development, but they were literally like exploiting people, slavery, obviously. Would America be America if without slavery? Would it be America without these forced relationships where they're exploiting people? Would America be this grand country? So I think as African people, when we're talking about development in Africa, we have to think specifically, how do we articulate development in a way that is not exploitative of our people? Because otherwise we don't become any better than the colonists. And also I think a lot of it, though, internally we have to reassess what we prioritize as far as development. So for example, there's a lot of fancy countries that have fancy buildings and fancy parks and fancy housing developments and things like that. Meanwhile, their healthcare system is in shambles for most people. They'll have like a small private healthcare system that's accessible by the rich and the wealthy, but overwhelmingly their healthcare system isn't good. Their education system for the vast majority of people is horrible. There's no such thing as social services. Like if you fall in hard times, you better hope that your family picks you up. So when so it's also on us to reassess, like, what is true development? Can you have nice roads and have a good education that's going to uplift the people, and a good healthcare system without all the fancy buildings, or have the fancy buildings come at a later stage because that's not the priority? These are all things that are on us. But yes, I definitely agree with your point. Development, as far as what we've been accustomed to looking at it as, is always at the hands of exploitation. And so we have to move the question, we have to move the conversation forward as far as developing in a way that brings everyone, good prosperity, and not just a certain amount of people, and is not barbaric, and is not exploitative, and is not, what has been done to us already.
Yeah, most definitely. I want to appreciate, as you were speaking, there was some comments that were coming up. I want to appreciate everybody who is contributing to this discussion. I can't see all of the comments. That's so I can't really read them off, but keep that conversation going. It just made me think of how we need to have this think tank, and maybe have many of y'all, sort of do a call where we can, discuss some things, some of these problems that we are raising, develop some solutions, and also becoming a member of We Charge Colonialism too. Join the think tank. Let me move on to the next paragraph. But yeah, I think that is definitely like an important thing to discuss, because I don't know. It's as if Walter Rodney's talking about this development from communalism in these different stages, but are these different stages, would they be considered development in the moral sense? I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? But this is a question. Yeah,
that's a good point, because I would argue, like, morally, like, when you go from communalism to these other stages, it's actually underdevelopment. So I would argue that European society, which once was more communal, as all societies were that come from Africa, because Africa was communal, that they have underdeveloped morally, while they have, quote unquote, developed economically and as far as infrastructure. So that's a good point too.
Yeah, and I think someone also had made a comment that European development is different from African or Afrocentric development, something like that. But that's another great point that was made. So where I'm at the last paragraph, I think, right? I'm I did. I think that's where I'm at. In the history of those societies, I think that's where I'm at. In the history of those societies which have passed through several modes of production, the opportunity is presented of seeing how quantitative changes give rise ultimately to an entirely different society. The key feature is that at given junctures, the social relations in the society were no longer effective in promoting advance. Indeed, they began to act as brakes on the productive forces and therefore had to be discarded. Take, for instance, the epic of slavery in Europe. However morally indefensible slavery may have been, it did serve for a while to open up the mines and agricultural plantations in large parts of Europe, and notably within the Roman Empire. But then those peasants who remained free had their labor depressed and underutilized because of the presence of slaves.
Ikemba, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah.
Comment is asking what page we're on, and I don't have the my phone is taken from me. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, so in the book, in the PDF, we're on page, I think it's page 12, the paragraph where it starts in the history. I started in that paragraph right there in the history. And if you're in the book, it's page 7, I believe. So we only did 2 pages. So it's page 7 in the book, the paragraph in the history at the bottom. And there's something, yeah, I'm gonna get through this paragraph. There's something I want to say. So I'm probably like 4 sentences in. So take for instance, on page 8 now, next page. Take for instance the epic of slavery in Europe. However morally indefensible slavery may have been, it did serve for a while to open up the mines and agricultural plantations in large parts of Europe, and notably within the Roman Empire. But then those peasants who remained free had their labor depressed and underutilized because of the presence of slaves. The slaves were not disposed to work at any task requiring skills, so the technological evolution of society threatened to come to a halt. Furthermore, the slaves were restless and slave revolts were expensive to put down. The landowners, seeing their estates going to ruin, decided that it would be best to grant the legal freedom for which slaves were clamoring and to keep exploiting the labor of these free serfs by ensuring that they had no lands to plow other than those of the landlords. Thereby, a new set of social relations, that of landlord and serf, replaced the old relations of slave master and slave. Yeah. So right here, like Walter Rodney is being a real materialist right now, and I think this is important though, because he's not getting into morality and he's not getting into how we feel right now. He's talking about like real material forces at work that's causing these changes, whether we like it or not. And so he's, and that's that dialectic right there. So he's just looking at a group that's being oppressed. They no longer, it's at the tipping point. That's what it's called, right? When they're just like, we can't take anymore. And what happens is there's a transformation in the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor. And so and this is where where he talks about the quantitative change and the qualitative change that's going to take place, whether it's for the better or worse. But
it's a good point. Like,
yeah,
so the enslavement of Africans, one thing that it did, I'm thinking like the US, but I'm sure like this is normal, like as he pointed out, like it creates it creates a new problem, because now you have what we have today. You have a bunch of angry whites who attribute their joblessness or their poverty to well, right now they like to use immigrants as a scapegoat, but they'll attribute it to Africans before. Like if you look at the race wars that used to happen, most often it was these whites who lost out on being employed because slave labor was so cheap. So now they're basically like looking for like some type of economic way to survive. And of course, you know, anytime that they had the opportunity to unleash their anger on us, they would do it. So it creates so many different problems, even for European society, but that kind of also shows you that while the European power structure certainly is not, you know, anything of that has any love for any African person or any indigenous person, but it doesn't even have love for itself, because if you look at how, you know, these systems even hurt their own people, but that shows you it's not necessarily for all of their people. It's really for a small class, which is something that I think, like, when I first started coming into consciousness, like, I didn't necessarily understand, like, the idea, like, you know, you see, like, oh, like, certainly all white people benefit from white supremacy, but only a small amount of them really benefit from white supremacy. Most of them, like, when you look at all these Occupy Wall Street people, or what's the new one, you know, what they call it, Antifa people or whatever, these are the people who are like, yo, this system ain't working for us. Or even if you look in France right now, there's a big movement among whites, like it's called I think the Yellow Vest movement, who are upset because the French government is not doing right by them. And a lot of this is also, you know, it's like there's been some analysis that a lot of this is also like a racist or has racial implications, because a lot of them are upset at the influx of immigrants also. But the point is, this system doesn't just benefit Europeans one way. So it's up to not, you know, it's up to, well, no, it's up to us to get out of this position. But as far as like how it's going to be done, you know, I think, you know, if they were if the power structure was smart and intelligent, they would see that they would want to change this thing for their own people, because it's only going to worsen. The conditions are only going to worsen. And when we get them out of power, there's not going to be anywhere to turn, because essentially this thing has destroyed the entire earth. And so I think that's a very important point not to lose, that the capitalist system is not good. It's horrible for us, but it's going to rear an ugly head even for their own people at some point.
Yeah, most definitely. It was a great comment that just came across the screen. Something in regards to the ownership class. Oh, you the best. An important aspect to see if the old system has carried its ownership character to the next system, which made sure oppression continue. But yeah, like that's something to really, and that's what we talk about with neo-colonialism, right? And it's probably another stage, you know, and we won't know, we won't know it. Sometimes it happens and we don't even realize it before it's too late. Like, hold on, like this system of oppression looks a bit different now. And I think it's definitely is very important that we recognize systems of oppression and exploitation and not ignore that, because if we don't acknowledge it for what it is, we don't acknowledge colonialism, then what's the need to resist, right? It's almost just it's like if you're perfect, there's no need to do anything else, right? And so I think it's the same thing. Like if there's no oppression and it's happening, there's no need to resist oppression because you don't think that it's there, that it exists. But just going back to I think a point that stood out to me on Walter Rodney, in this, at least in this paragraph, it made me think of how society has to be brought to the point where it cannot function, and that's how like the change takes place. So he was talking about that in that paragraph, as far as just like, okay, it was the system of slavery that wasn't working out. There was a point where like the workers, they could not compete with the enslaved, and so something had to change, right? Whether it changed for the better or the worse, the worse. But I think like the point is there's going to be a change, and so we have been lulled to sleep, in some places, because we're resisting all over the continent. You see resistance taking place from the masses. And I mean, there's people in America that's resisting too. But when I think about America, though, the United States, that is, I feel like there's not enough of us who understand that, hey, we have to bring this system to a halt so we can bring some transformation.
We are at time, and I really wanted to get at something that you said, but maybe we can take it up next
Yeah.
week. But specifically, I want to talk about the point that you made about how things have to be unsustainable for the system as it exists, for the system to change. Like, that's a really important point. So maybe we can get back into that next week.
Yeah, most definitely. So that was, these hours go fast, but I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in and being a part. Again, this discussion, we are here next week at 10 a.m. So make sure you set a reminder and that you're here and that you share. If you enjoyed the discussion, get other people involved so we can build this, build our base. And get this word out to as many African people as possible. So until next week, I want to say peace and power to everyone.